The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where everything feels normal until it doesn't. Sunlight came through the kitchen window. My coffee was still steaming, and then I saw it. A thick, official envelope stamped certified mail. My name printed in bold, the return address from the Lakeside Reserve Homeowners Association, a place I'd never had anything to do with. I tore it open, skimmed the first few lines, and had to read them twice because I thought maybe I was still half asleep. $47,000 in fines for violating HOA regulations. I actually laughed at first, out loud, because it was so absurd it circled right back to terrifying. I wasn't even part of their HOA. I'd lived in my house for 12 years, outside their borders, outside their reach, outside their world. But outside my window, standing on the other side of the creek like a self-appointed monarch surveying her kingdom, was Margaret Maggie Dunn, president of the HOA and walking embodiment of the phrase, "too much free time." She was pointing at my home like it was an eyesore on her personal empire, her manicured lawn glittering with dew. Peace. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, I came home in 2010 and used my VA loan to buy 2 acres on the edge of Cedar Creek Township, a property that used to be part of the old Henderson farm before developers got their hands on it. Back then, this area was nothing but pasture, the kind of open sky that makes you forget traffic exists. Then came Lakeside Reserve, the subdivision across the creek. A maze of white fences, cookie-cutter houses, and HOA bylaws that read like a small country constitution. The creek, Silverbrook Run, cut between my land and theirs, a perfect natural line of separation, like God himself had said. "Ethan, you stay on this side where freedom still breathes." I built a small workshop behind my house, just a simple place to run my electrical contracting business, nothing crazy. My daughter Lila was 4 when we moved in, and by the time she turned 16, that land was home. We planted trees, fixed up the barn, even built a little deck overlooking the creek where we'd sit at night and listen to the frogs. It was quiet, honest living. And then Maggie Dunn came along. She was everything you imagine when you think of a suburban tyrant. Early 50s, always dressed like she was on her way to a real estate awards gala, husband sitting pretty on the county planning commission, Lexus spotless enough to perform surgery in. She'd been HOA. Iced coffee in the other. "Mr. Ross," she said, "your workshop violates our community standards." I blinked, looked from her to the creek, then back to her. "Ma'am, this isn't your community." She gave me that tight smile, the kind people wear when they're about to ruin your week. "We'll see about that," she said, turning on her heel, gravel crunching under her designer flats. Every time I fired up my saw, I'd catch her reflection in her living room window, hands on hips, expression that said she smelled sin. It was creepy, but I ignored it. I'd fought real wars. One woman with a clipboard wasn't going to shake me. Until the night of Lila's 16th birthday. Just a small barbecue. 10 kids, a speaker playing country music, and burgers on the grill. We wrapped up by 9:30 p.m., not a single complaint-worthy thing. But Maggie called the cops. Twice. The officers arrived, found nothing. One of them even grabbed a hot dog. They laughed and left. I figured that was the end of it. The next morning, I found a crisp white envelope under my windshield wiper, violation notice. It listed my gravel driveway, my fence, and my workshop as unapproved exterior modifications, $500 each. Lila looked at it, rolled her eyes, and said, "Dad, this lady's lost her mind." And that's when I knew this wasn't going away. Maggie Dunn had a reputation. She'd pushed other families before, working-class folks, single parents, retirees, people who didn't have the time or money to fight back. They'd all eventually folded, paid the fines, repainted their mailboxes, tore down fences that were 2 inches too tall. I was supposed to do the same, but she picked the wrong guy. So the next morning, I drove straight to the Cedar County Courthouse. I'd spent years in the Army learning that the only way to win a fight was to get the facts. The clerk, an older woman named Dorothy, helped me pull my original property deed. The papers were yellowed, edges soft from time, but clear as day. My lot was recorded in 1970, 47 feet outside the HOA's jurisdiction. But Maggie wasn't the kind of person who accepted reality gracefully. 2 days later, she was back, dragging her brother-in-law Dale, a part-time surveyor who probably watched too many courtroom, for her lawyer. A week later, A letter arrived from Wexler and Grant attorneys at law, for pages of jargon and condescension demanding I cease all unauthorized construction and business activity within HOA limits. I took it straight to Jenna Blake, my attorney, a woman known for chewing through bullies like breakfast cereal. She read the letter, chuckled, and said, "This isn't law, Ethan. Parcel 48B was intentionally excluded from the HOA's creation in 2009 because of flood zone restrictions." The signature on that exclusion? Commissioner Charles Dunn, Maggie's husband. He'd known all along. Then Jenna discovered something even worse. The original incorporation papers for Lakeside Reserve included a forged signature from the previous owner of my land, Robert Henley, who'd been dead 6 months before that date. Somebody had literally signed for a dead man. Fraud, clear as the creek that divided us. But Maggie wasn't slowing down. She escalated. She called in county inspectors, filed anonymous noise complaints, and distributed flyers warning neighbors that I was running an unlicensed commercial enterprise out of my garage. One morning, I found roofing nails scattered across my driveway. 2 of my truck tires went flat. A week later, Lila's car got keyed. One long word carved into the paint: move. Watching her fight back tears in the driveway, I swore to myself this would end, and it wouldn't just end. It would end her game for good. Then, like divine timing, Mrs. Patricia Ward, an 82-year-old neighbor who'd lived, said, "Maggie likes to forget what she says." I don't. We played the tapes that night in my workshop, the hum of my desk fan mixing with Maggie's voice. "We'll bury him in paperwork," she said on. That's when we started organizing. My workshop turned into a strategy bunker. Jenna mapped out the legal plan. Patricia brought more tapes. Lila kept notes like a war correspondent. Families who'd been bullied before came forward. The Kowalskis, who'd paid thousands in forced yard renovations. The Rodriguezes, who'd moved after Maggie called their boss about community conflicts. We were building not just a defense, but an army. Then came the sheriff, hand-delivering a lawsuit. Maggie was suing me for $47,000 in accrued fines and breach of HOA compliance. Jenna skimmed it, smirked, and said, "Perfect." She just handed us the rope to hang her with. We filed a countersuit for harassment, defamation, and fraudulent incorporation. Meanwhile, Jenna's paralegal Sarah, a relentless researcher, unearthed something explosive, an environmental study from 2009 with handwritten notes that read, "Commissioner Dunn advised flood zone exclusion. Mandatory per EPA compliance." They had knowingly falsified documents to expand HOA territory. And if that wasn't enough, Patricia's tapes included Maggie literally admitting it. "We know that lands." Pretending to cry about uncooperative neighbors. They never even called me for comment. Lila saw the broadcast and clenched her fists. "She's going to regret this," she said. And she was right. The county finally scheduled a public commission hearing to review the dispute. It was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even a rep from the district attorney's office. Maggie arrived in a power suit. "This man," she declared dramatically, pointing at me, "is endangering our community and lowering our home equity." People murmured. For a second, I almost admired the performance. Then Jenna stood up. Calm, collected, lethal. "Commissioners," she said, "before you entertain another word, you should know this association was built on fraud." And just like that, she detonated years of corruption in 10 minutes flat. She laid out the evidence, the environmental study, the forged signature of a dead man, the tape recordings of Maggie's own voice. When those played, the room went silent except for the hiss of the speakers. "He'll never fight back," Maggie's voice said. "We just keep the pressure up." Gasps. Then the HOA's management company rep spoke up, confirming they'd found financial irregularities and misuse of association funds. Maggie's face drained of color. She tried to interrupt, shouting about conspiracies and fake news. Fraudulently incorporated. All actions nullified. All fines void. The matter referred to the district attorney for prosecution. Maggie stood there trembling, muttering, "This isn't over." Could barely breathe. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. I told her, "No, kiddo. We all did." 6 months later, justice came calling. Maggie and her husband were charged with fraud, forgery, harassment, and conspiracy. She pled guilty, took probation, full restitution, and 1 year of community service cleaning the creek she tried to claim. He lost his commissioner's seat and his. Other families got restitution for years of abuse. But the best part? Seeing the neighborhood finally breathe again. We reorganized into the Silverbrook Neighbors Association, this time voluntary, transparent, and drama-free. Patricia was elected president unanimously. Her first act was to start the Silverbrook Festival, an annual barbecue by the creek where families laughed instead of whispered. Kids built rope swings, dogs splashed in the water. The same creek that once divided us now brought everyone together. Lila thrived. She even testified in front of the state legislature. When they passed the Silverbrook Act, a law requiring financial transparency and external audits for all HOAs statewide, Jenna's firm became famous for defending families like ours. They called her the HOA Slayer. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I stand by the creek with a cup of coffee, watching the water flow past the place where it all started. Across the way, playing tricks. Either way, I smile. Because I know what she doesn't. That peace doesn't come from control, it comes from letting go. That little strip of water still runs clear and steady, like time itself refusing to stop for anyone's arrogance. And if I've learned anything, it's that no matter how loud the bullies get, truth flows louder. So yeah, that's the story of how one stubborn veteran, one teenage daughter, and one old woman with cassette tapes took down a suburban empire built on fear. And if you're sitting there wondering what you'd do if someone tried to bully, Maggie Dunn count on silence. And the moment you stop being silent, their power evaporates. The good guys don't always win quickly, but sometimes, when you play the long game, you don't just win. You make sure the creek keeps running clear long after the tyrants are gone. And that's what I think about whenever I walk down to the creek in the evenings, when the air smells like pine and sawdust, when the water catches the sunset and glows like molten copper. It's quiet now. The kind of quiet that hums instead of presses, the kind that feels earned. Sometimes Lila joins me, barefoot, mug of tea in hand, laughing at how wild the grass has grown on the bank where Maggie used to stand with her clipboard. She says it looks better that way, more alive. And she's right. Freedom looks a little messy, and that's the beauty of it. The neighborhood finally learned that perfection isn't peace. We learned that lawns don't have to match and fences don't have to line up to. Violates half the old bylaws, but gives every kid on the street a place to hang out. Even the older folks, like Patricia, started painting murals on their fences. The sound of laughter replaced with new tools and a wide-open door. The smell of cedar filled the air as I sanded the beams. Neighbors would stop by, bringing lemonade or pie, asking for small repairs, chatting like we'd been. Polished but pale, her confidence cracked. When the judge read the sentence, probation, restitution, community service, she didn't even look at anyone. I almost pitied her for a second, seeing her stripped of all that control. Almost. Charles sat behind her, face gray, probably realizing that decades of quiet corruption were finally catching up. When it was over, Jenna turned to me and said, "That's one less tyrant in the world." We walked out of that courthouse into sunlight, so bright it almost felt symbolic. Lila flourished after that. She started volunteering at the community center, helping kids with after-school projects. She even spoke at a veterans fundraiser with Jenna, sharing how standing up for what's right isn't just about laws, it's about dignity. She told the crowd, "My dad taught me that courage doesn't end when the war does." I cried that night, quietly, in my workshop, surrounded by sawdust and memories. A few months later, a letter came from the state legislature. They were drafting a bill inspired by our case, the Silverbrook Transparency Act, requiring all HOAs to provide public financial audits and fair appeal systems. They wanted me to testify. I almost said no. I'm not a politician, but Lila convinced me. "Dad, you fought one battle," she said. "This finishes it." So I stood before a room of officials, knowing it meant fewer families would have to go through what we did. Maggie's house stayed empty for almost a year before the bank finally sold it. The new owners, a young couple with a baby, asked me one afternoon if I knew the previous residents. I just smiled and said, "Not well, thankfully." They laughed, not knowing the half of it. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine Maggie driving by, looking at what used to be her kingdom, seeing the festival banners strung across yards, kids playing barefoot where no trespassing signs once stood. I wonder if she feels regret. Maybe she does. Maybe not. But I know she sees something she'll never have again: peace. Every spring now, the neighborhood throws a big festival. We grill, play music, dance by the creek, stage and tell stories, her voice strong and sweet, and someone always brings up the tapes. She keeps them in a glass case now at the town library, labeled the Silverbrook Chronicles. Live in our own home. She nodded, quiet. I'm glad you didn't let her win. I looked at her, older now, stronger, eyes full of the same fire I used to have. You're the reason I couldn't, I said. How they stood up to their own Margaret Duns. Some just needed someone to say, you can win. That's why we started a nonprofit, Free the Neighborhoods Foundation, helping families fight unfair HOA harassment. Jenna sits on the board. Lila manages outreach. Patricia insists on making cookies for every event. We've helped dozens of communities dissolve corrupt associations and start fresh. Every victory reminds me that what happened in Silverbrook wasn't just justice. It was a blueprint. Still, every once in a while, when I walk out to my workshop at night, I catch myself glancing across the creek, half expecting to see that familiar silhouette, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. Old habits die hard. But instead of anger, all I feel now is peace. The trees rustle, the water murmurs, and the moon paints everything silver. I whisper a little thank you to the universe, because somehow, all that chaos led to this calm. You know, people ask me sometimes if I ever, where you realize home isn't just a building. It's the people who stand beside you when things go dark. That's what we built here. And maybe that's what this whole story was really about. Not laws or fines or paperwork, but the simple, stubborn belief that bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, can't own your peace unless you let them. We let one person control our lives for too long, and when we finally stood up, it didn't just change our street. It changed us. It taught us that kindness can be stronger than authority, that truth can outlast intimidation, and that sometimes the loudest revolution starts with a whisper that says, no more. So if you're watching this, maybe you've got your own Maggie Dunn breathing down your neck, someone who uses rules to control instead of protect. I'll tell you this, document everything, stay calm, get your facts, and never underestimate the power of standing your ground. You don't have to yell. You just have to outlast them. Bullies thrive on compliance. They starve on resistance. And when you finally push back, when you watch them unravel under the weight of their own lies, there's no sweeter sound in the world. Except maybe the sound of a creek, flowing free, washing away every trace of their tyranny. That's the story of how I got sued by a woman who thought she could own me with paperwork and ended up. It's this: never underestimate ordinary people who've had enough. Because sometimes, when you push them too far, they stop being afraid. And that's when real change begins. Now, the nights here are quiet again. The frogs sing. The kids' laughter drifts over the water. The creek glows under the moonlight like a living thing, whispering its steady truth that no matter how many fences people build, nature always finds its way through. And so do we.